I was standing in my wheat field when I heard the first rumble of heavy machinery, and my gut told me that the peaceful life I had built on my Iowa farm was about to be shattered. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when the sound of diesel engines violated the quiet countryside. I shielded my eyes against the glare and spotted them: three massive dump trucks, a road grader, and what looked like a paving machine making their way down the county road that bordered my property. But they weren't staying on the county road. They were turning onto my land. I dropped the fence post I had been carrying and sprinted toward the vehicles, waving my arms. The lead truck didn't slow down. It barreled straight through the wooden fence that marked my property line, sending splinters flying in every direction. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched 200 feet of fencing that I had installed myself just 3 years ago get demolished in seconds. "Hey, stop. This is private property," I shouted, but my voice was drowned out by the roar of engines. The trucks kept moving, cutting a path directly through my southern field where I had just planted winter wheat. The crops I had spent weeks preparing, the seeds I had invested thousands of dollars in, were being crushed under massive tires without a second thought. I felt my face flush with rage as I chased after them, my boots sinking into the soft earth. The convoy finally came to a halt about 300 yards into my property. A man in a hard hat climbed out of one of the trucks, clipboard in hand, completely ignoring me as I ran up to him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, breathing hard from the sprint. "This is my farm. You just destroyed my fence and my crops." The man barely glanced at me. "We're here on behalf of the Meadowbrook HOA. We have authorization to construct a connecting road through this property." I stared at him like he had just spoken in a foreign language. "Meadowbrook HOA? I'm not part of any HOA. This is a farm, a working farm, and you definitely don't have authorization to be here." He sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable, and flipped through his papers. "According to our records, this land falls within the extended boundaries of the Meadowbrook Home Owners Association. We're building a secondary access road to connect the new development on the east side to the main entrance on the west." "Your records are wrong," I said, forcing myself to stay calm even though I wanted to grab that clipboard and throw it into the nearest irrigation ditch. "I own this land free and clear. I bought it 6 years ago from the Henderson family. There's no HOA. There's never been an HOA." The foreman shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA board. I'm just here to do a job. We start grading today." Before I could respond, he turned and walked back to his crew, shouting orders. Within minutes, the grader fired up and began scraping away the topsoil, creating a wide path that cut diagonally across my property. I stood there, fists clenched, watching in disbelief as they violated my land. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's office. 20 minutes later, Deputy Martinez pulled up in his cruiser, looking tired and under-caffeinated. I had gone to high school with Rick Martinez, and he was a decent guy, but I could tell from his expression that this was going to be more complicated than I hoped. "Marcus, what's going on?" he asked, surveying the scene. "They're trespassing, Rick. They destroyed my fence, they're tearing up my crops, and they claim they have the right to build a road through my farm." I gestured at the machinery, which had continued working despite the arrival of law enforcement. Rick walked over to the foreman and had a conversation I couldn't hear over the engine noise. When he came back, his expression was troubled. "He showed me a permit from the county," Rick said slowly. "It looks official, Marcus. I can't just shut them down without more information." "A permit to build on my land? How is that possible? I never gave anyone permission." "I don't know, but this is a civil matter until we can prove otherwise. You need to get a lawyer and contact the county planning office. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied right now." I felt betrayed, even though I knew Rick was just following procedure. He left, and I stood there watching the destruction continue. By noon, they had cleared a path 20 feet wide and nearly a quarter-mile long, straight through the heart of my farm. I didn't waste any time. I drove into town, to the small office of Bill Hartley, the only lawyer in our rural county who handled property disputes. Bill was in his 60s, with white hair and a perpetual expression of mild concern. He listened to my story while taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "The Meadowbrook HOA," he said thoughtfully. "That's the new development that went up about 2 miles from your place, right?" "I guess so. I don't pay much attention to that stuff. I'm busy running a farm. They've been expanding pretty aggressively. Bought up a lot of land from various owners over the past few years." He pulled up something on his computer. "Let me check the property records." While he typed, I tried to calm my racing thoughts. The Meadowbrook development had appeared gradually over the last 5 years. What started as a small neighborhood of maybe 30 houses had grown into a sprawling suburb with hundreds of homes. I had noticed the construction, but never thought it would affect me. My farm was separated from their land by a good stretch of undeveloped property, or at least it had been. "Here's the thing," Bill said, turning his monitor so I could see. "According to the county records, your property is listed as being within the Meadowbrook HOA boundaries as of 6 months ago. That's impossible. How can they just add my property to their HOA without my permission? They can't." "Not legally, but someone filed paperwork claiming they could." He scrolled through more documents. "It looks like they're claiming an easement based on an old right-of-way from the 1950s before your land was subdivided from the original farm." "The Henderson farm?" "Exactly. There was apparently a dirt road that ran through the property back when it was all one big parcel. The HOA is claiming that right-of-way was never formally dissolved, so they have the legal right to develop it into a modern road." I rubbed my face, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. "But even if that's true, which I doubt, they can't just roll in with heavy equipment and start paving without notifying me, can they?" "Absolutely not. There's a process. Notifications, hearings, assessments. None of that happened here based on what you're telling me." Bill leaned back in his chair. "I'll file for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos, videos, measurements. Get estimates on the damage to your crops and property." I thanked him and headed back to the farm. The construction crew had left for the day, but the damage was staggering. I walked the length of the destruction, taking photos with my phone. They had carved a path that was going to cut my farm nearly in half. The southern field was ruined. The fence was destroyed. And deep ruts from the heavy machinery had compacted the soil in ways that would affect drainage and planting for years. As the sun set, I sat on my porch and tried to make sense of it all. My farm was modest by Iowa standards, just 200 acres, but it was mine. I had grown up in Chicago, but after my dad passed away and left me a small inheritance, I decided I wanted a different life. I wanted space, quiet, and the satisfaction of working with my hands. I found this property 6 years ago, bought it at a fair price, and had been building something real ever since. And now some suburban HOA thought they could just plow through it like I didn't exist. The next morning, I was up before dawn. I wanted to get more photos in the early light, and I wanted to be there when the construction crew arrived. Sure enough, at 7 o'clock, the trucks rolled back onto my property. This time, a woman was with them. She climbed out of a white Lexus SUV, wearing expensive-looking athletic wear and oversized sunglasses. Everything about her screamed suburb. She had that haircut, the one that somehow every HOA president seemed to have. Her blonde highlights caught the morning sun as she approached me with a clipboard, her heels sinking into the soft earth. "You must be Marcus Chen," she said, not offering her hand. "I'm Barbara Hutchins, president of the Meadowbrook Home Owners Association." "You're trespassing on my property," I said flatly, "and you're destroying my livelihood." Barbara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Actually, we're exercising our legal right to develop the connecting road that was always part of the original property easement. I have all the documentation right here." She thrust the clipboard at me. I scanned the papers, most of which were dense legal language that I couldn't fully parse without Bill's help. But one thing was clear. They were claiming that when I bought the property, I had inherited an obligation to maintain public access through my land. "This is garbage," I said, handing the clipboard back. "My lawyer is filing an injunction today. You need to stop work immediately." Barbara's smile hardened. "Our lawyers assure us we're completely within our rights. The county has issued the permits. The work will continue. I suggest you cooperate, Mr. Chen, because this road is getting built whether you like it or not." "Why are you even building this road?" "You have an entrance on the west side. The Meadowbrook community is growing," she said, as if explaining something to a child. "We've expanded to the east and our residents need convenient access. The current route adds 15 minutes to their commute. This road will cut through your property and connect to the county road on the other side, reducing drive time significantly. So you're destroying my farm to save your residents 15 minutes. I understand you're upset, but progress sometimes requires sacrifice. We're prepared to compensate you fairly for the easement." "I don't want your compensation, I want you off my land." Barbara's expression turned cold. "You don't have a choice. The law is on our side. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have work to do." She walked back to her Lexus, made some phone calls, and then stood there supervising while the crew resumed tearing up my property. I called Bill Hartley, who told me the injunction hearing was scheduled for the next afternoon. In the meantime, there was nothing I could do except watch and document. Over the next 24 hours, the crew made shocking progress. They had clearly brought in additional equipment overnight. Now there were 2 graders, 4 dump trucks hauling gravel, and a compactor that shook the ground like an earthquake every time it passed. They worked until well after dark, using portable floodlights to keep going. By the time I appeared in court the next afternoon, they had graded nearly half a mile of road and were beginning to lay gravel for the base layer. Judge Patricia Moreland, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, listened to Bill's arguments and then to the HOA's lawyer, a slick guy from Des Moines named Theodore Kramer. Kramer presented a thick stack of documents supposedly proving the existence of the historical easement. He had old survey maps, faded photographs, and depositions from people who claimed to remember the old road from decades ago. It was clear the HOA had been planning this for a long time and had prepared thoroughly. Bill countered that even if the easement existed, which he disputed, the HOA had failed to follow proper notification procedures. He argued that I had a right to challenge the easement in a full hearing before any construction began, and that the current destruction constituted irreparable harm to my property. Judge Moreland considered both sides and then made her ruling. "I'm denying the injunction. The evidence presented by the HOA is sufficient to establish a prima facie case for the easement. However, I'm setting a full hearing for 3 weeks from today to determine the ultimate validity of their claim. In the meantime, construction may continue, but the HOA must post a bond to cover potential damages if Mr. Chen ultimately prevails." I felt the floor drop out from under me. 3 weeks. They could finish the entire road in 3 weeks. Bill put a hand on my shoulder as we left the courtroom. "We'll win the full hearing," he said. "Their documentation is shaky, but in the meantime you need to prepare for the possibility that this road gets built. So I just watch them destroy everything I've worked for, document everything, every dollar of damage. Every disruption to your operations. If we win, they'll owe you significant compensation. And Marcus, start thinking strategically. If they're building a road through your property, that gives you certain leverage." I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but I would soon enough. The construction accelerated. Barbara Hutchins was out there almost every day, directing traffic like a general commanding an army. She had a way of looking at me with this smug satisfaction, as if my suffering was personally gratifying to her. The crew worked 12-hour days and the road took shape with shocking speed. They poured gravel, compacted it, and then brought in the paving equipment. The smell of hot asphalt filled the air, making me nauseous every time the wind blew from that direction. Within 2 weeks, there was a brand new 2-lane road cutting diagonally across my farm, stretching from the eastern edge of my property all the way to the western boundary. But then I realized something that Bill had probably already figured out. The road didn't actually connect to anything useful on my western boundary. It dead-ended at my fence line. On the other side of that fence was another 50 acres that I also owned. A separate parcel I had bought 3 years ago when Old Man Jenkins retired and sold off his land. The HOA had assumed, apparently, that the western boundary of my main parcel was the end of my property. They hadn't done their homework. To complete their shortcut, their precious road that would save their residents 15 minutes, they needed to cross that 50-acre parcel to reach the county road, and I had never granted them an easement for that parcel. There was no historical right-of-way. It had been completely separate from the old Henderson farm. I realized this on a Tuesday evening, standing at the western fence line where the new road abruptly stopped. I could see Barbara's Lexus parked at the dead end, and I could see her on her phone, probably realizing the same thing I had just figured out. The next morning, a different lawyer showed up at my door. Not Theodore Kramer, but a woman named Michelle Portman who introduced herself as the HOA's chief counsel. "Mr. Chen, I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said, all smiles and professional courtesy. "I'd like to discuss a reasonable arrangement for extending the road across your western parcel." "You mean the parcel you don't have any rights to?" Her smile tightened. "We're prepared to offer generous compensation for a formal easement. We'll also establish a maintenance agreement so you won't be responsible for upkeep." "How generous? $20,000. I almost laughed. "You destroyed nearly 50 acres of crops on my main parcel. You demolished fencing, compacted soil, and disrupted my entire operation. And now you want to pay me $20,000 to finish your road. That's for the new easement only. The previous construction was covered under the existing right-of-way, which may not be legal. We have a hearing in 1 week." Michelle's expression hardened. "Mr. Chen, I encourage you to be reasonable. The Meadowbrook HOA represents over 500 families. We have significant resources and political connections. Fighting us will only cost you more in the long run. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. $20,000 is a fair offer." "Get off my property." She left, but I knew this wasn't over. That evening, I got a call from Bill Hartley. "Marcus, we need to talk about strategy for the hearing. I've been reviewing the HOA's documents more carefully, and I found something interesting. The historical easement they're claiming is based on a road that was never formally surveyed or recorded. It was just a dirt path used by farmers. Their entire case is built on hearsay and old photographs that could show almost anything. So we can win. I think we have a strong chance. But even if we win, they've already built most of the road. The judge will probably order them to pay substantial damages, but the road itself might stay. Courts are reluctant to order expensive infrastructure torn out. What if I don't want their money? What if I just want my farm back the way it was?" Bill was quiet for a moment. "That might not be possible, but Marcus, you have something they need now. That western parcel is your leverage. You could negotiate a settlement that gives you more than just money." "Like what?" "Like forcing them to reconfigure their entire development plans. Like making them pay for improvements to your property that actually benefit you. Like getting them to agree to restrictions that protect your farm operations. You're in the driver's seat now, whether they realize it or not." I thought about that after we hung up. The HOA had steamrolled me, treated me like I didn't matter, and destroyed my property without a second thought. Barbara Hutchins had looked at me with such contempt, as if I was just an obstacle to be removed. And now they needed something from me. The hearing arrived. The courtroom was more crowded this time. Barbara Hutchins was there with at least a dozen other people I didn't recognize, presumably other HOA board members and residents. They filled the gallery, a show of force meant to intimidate, Bill presented our case methodically. He dismantled the HOA's historical evidence piece by piece, showing that the old photographs didn't definitively prove anything, that the depositions came from people with questionable memories of events from 50 years ago, and that there was no formal recorded easement in any official county documents. He argued that even if there had been an informal path once, it had been abandoned for decades, and any implied easement had been extinguished. He presented evidence that when I bought the property, there was no mention of any easement in the title documents, and that I had purchased it in good faith believing I had full control of the land. Theodore Kramer fought back hard, but I could see Judge Moreland's expression shifting as Bill made his points. When it came time for her ruling, the courtroom was silent. Having reviewed all the evidence and arguments, I find that the Meadowbrook HOA has failed to prove the existence of a valid historical easement across Mr. Chen's property. The evidence is circumstantial at best, and does not meet the burden of proof required to infringe on Mr. Chen's property rights. The construction of the road was therefore illegal, and the HOA is liable for damages. I felt a wave of relief so intense I nearly collapsed. Barbara Hutchins looked like she had been slapped. The HOA board members were whispering frantically among themselves. Judge Moreland continued. However, given that substantial construction has already occurred and that removing the road would be economically wasteful, I'm ordering the HOA to negotiate with Mr. Chen in good faith for a formal easement. If no agreement can be reached within 30 days, I will order the road removed and restored to farmland at the HOA's expense. Additionally, the HOA will pay Mr. Chen $50,000 in damages for the illegal construction, plus legal fees. The judge's gavel came down and the hearing was over. Bill shook my hand, grinning. We won. Now comes the fun part. The next week was quiet. I didn't hear anything from the HOA and their silence was puzzling. The road sat there, complete but useless, dead-ending at my fence line. I went about my farm work, trying to salvage what I could of the growing season and planning for next year. Then, 8 days after the hearing, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery again. I threw on clothes and ran outside to find a crew tearing down my fence at the western boundary. They were preparing to extend the road across my other parcel, the one they definitely had no rights to. Barbara Hutchins was there, standing beside her Lexus, arms crossed. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted as I approached. "You have no right to be here." "The judge ordered us to negotiate," Barbara said calmly. "We're negotiating. This is our opening position." "Your opening position is to commit another crime. We prefer to think of it as demonstrating our resolve. Mr. Chen, you're going to give us this easement one way or another. We can do it the easy way or the hard way." I pulled out my phone and called 911. This time, when Deputy Martinez arrived, I was ready with the judge's order and clear evidence of criminal trespass. The construction crew stopped working when they saw the deputy taking statements and photographs. "Miss Hutchins, I need you to stop work immediately," Rick said. "This is clearly not authorized." "We have every intention of paying Mr. Chen for the easement," Barbara said. "We're simply moving forward efficiently." "That's not how this works." "You need to leave now or I'll have to arrest you for trespassing." Barbara stared at him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she nodded to her crew. "Pack it up." For now, after they left, Rick turned to me. "Marcus, you should get a restraining order." This woman isn't going to stop. He was right. That afternoon, Bill filed for a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from entering my property without permission. The judge granted it immediately, but the harassment didn't stop. Over the next week, I received dozens of phone calls from HOA residents, angry that their precious shortcut was blocked. They called me selfish, stubborn, and worse. Someone left a dead possum on my doorstep. My mailbox was vandalized. Twice, I found nails scattered across my driveway. Barbara Hutchins organized a protest. On a Saturday morning, about 50 people showed up at the entrance to my farm, holding signs that said things like "Stop blocking progress" and "One man shouldn't control our community." Local news showed up, and Barbara gave an interview painting me as an unreasonable landowner standing in the way of necessary infrastructure. I declined to be interviewed, but the damage was done. Suddenly, I was the bad guy in the court of public opinion, at least among the Meadowbrook residents. Bill advised me to stay quiet and let them dig their own grave. "The more unreasonable they act, the better your negotiating position," he said. "They're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes." The 30-day deadline from the judge's order was approaching, and I still hadn't heard any official settlement offer from the HOA. Then, with just 3 days left, Michelle Portman called and asked to meet. We met at a neutral location, a conference room at the county library. Michelle was there with Theodore Cramer and Barbara Hutchins. "Bill came with me." "Gentlemen," Michelle began, "we're here to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. The Meadowbrook HOA is prepared to offer Mr. Chen $100,000 for a permanent easement across both parcels, plus an additional $50,000 for a retroactive easement covering the already constructed portion of the road." $150,000 total, Bill said. "That's insulting given the damage and harassment my client has endured." "It's a generous offer," Theodore Cramer interjected. "The alternative is we go back to court and tie this up for years." "No," Barbara Hutchins said suddenly. "The alternative is we build our road somewhere else and Mr. Chen loses his only opportunity for compensation." I leaned forward. "You can't build it somewhere else. You don't have anywhere else to go. Your development is landlocked without this route. You built that road through my farm because you assumed you could bully me into giving you the rest. But now you're stuck." Barbara's face flushed red. "You arrogant little—" "Barbara," Michelle said sharply, cutting her off. "Let's remain professional." But I had seen something in that moment of anger, something that gave me an idea. I stood up. "Here's my offer. You remove the road, restore my property to its original condition, and pay me $200,000 in damages. Or alternatively, you give me something I actually want." "Which is?" Michelle asked. "Access. You're building houses to the east of my farm, right? On what used to be the Morrison property?" "Yes, what about it?" "That land borders the county road. You're developing it, which means you'll be running utilities out there. Water, sewer, electric, fiber optic. I want a permanent easement to connect to those utilities. Right now, I'm on well water, septic, and satellite internet. You give me proper access to municipal services and I'll give you your road." The HOA team exchanged glances. Barbara looked ready to explode, but Michelle raised a hand to silence her. "That would be extremely expensive," Michelle said. "Running utility lines across undeveloped land could cost hundreds of thousands. But you're already doing it for your development. You just need to extend the lines a bit further to my property. And it's a one-time cost, whereas fighting me in court will cost you money and time indefinitely. Plus, think of the PR. Instead of the story being about big HOA bullying small farmer, it becomes about community partnership and mutual benefit." Bill was nodding approvingly beside me. This was better than money. This was something that would actually improve my farm's value and operations for decades to come. Michelle asked for a recess to discuss privately. 20 minutes later, they came back. "We'll agree to extend water, sewer, and electric to your property line," Michelle said. "Fiber optic is handled by a private company, so we can't guarantee that, but we'll facilitate the introduction. In exchange, you grant us a 50-foot easement across both parcels for the road, and you release all claims for damages related to the initial construction. 60-foot easement. You maintain it in perpetuity, and you build a fence on both sides so my livestock don't wander onto the road. Also, you pay for restoration of the damaged crops and soil remediation on the affected fields." "Deal," Michelle said, extending her hand before Barbara could object. We shook on it. Bill would draw up the formal agreements, but the core deal was set. I had turned their aggression into something actually valuable for my farm. Barbara Hutchins looked like she wanted to murder me, but she kept her mouth shut. As they filed out, she couldn't resist one parting shot. "You got lucky, Mr. Chen. Don't think this makes us friends." "Wouldn't dream of it, Barbara." Over the next 2 weeks, crews completed the road across my western parcel, connecting the Meadowbrook development to the county road. Simultaneously, other crews ran utility lines to my property. I contracted with the electric and water companies to complete the connections, and within a month, I had running water and sewage that didn't depend on my well and septic system. The fiber optic company did eventually come through, and having high-speed internet on the farm was a game changer. I could run my business more efficiently, access modern farming data in real time, and even started selling some of my produce online. The HOA built solid fences on both sides of the road, as agreed. I planted fast-growing trees along my side of the fence to create a visual barrier. Life started returning to normal, but then, about 6 weeks after we finalized the agreement, I noticed something odd. Traffic on the new road was much heavier than I expected. It wasn't just Meadowbrook residents using it as a shortcut. It was everyone from the surrounding area. I drove into town and asked around. Turns out, the HOA had advertised the new road as a public route, claiming it would ease traffic congestion in the area. They had even gotten the county to designate it as a public road, which meant county maintenance and higher traffic volume. That wasn't what we had agreed to. The easement was supposed to be for HOA residents, not the entire county. I called Bill Hartley immediately. "They can't change the terms without your consent," Bill said after I explained the situation. "The easement specifically limits use to Meadowbrook residents and guests. If they've opened it up as a public road, they've violated the agreement. So what do? We enforce the agreement. Literally. That's when I got the idea that would become legendary in our county. If the HOA wasn't going to honor our agreement, I would enforce it myself. I contacted a fence company and had them come out for an estimate. Then I called a meeting with the HOA board, as was my right under our agreement. Barbara Hutchins showed up looking irritated, along with Michelle Portman and 2 other board members I hadn't met. "This better be important, Mr. Chen," Barbara said. "We're all very busy. I've noticed that traffic on the easement road has increased significantly. It appears you've designated it as a public road without my consent." "The county made that designation," Michelle said carefully. "Once the road was built, they determined it served a public benefit and should be maintained as part of the county road system. Did you lobby for that designation?" "Silence. Thought so. You violated our agreement. The easement was for HOA use, not public use." "Mr. Chen, we can't control what the county decides," Barbara said, but her tone was defensive. "Actually, you can, and you did, so here's what's going to happen. Either you get the county to revoke that public designation and restrict the road to HOA use only, or I exercise my rights under the easement agreement." "What rights?" one of the other board members asked. "The agreement allows me to place reasonable restrictions on the easement to protect my property and operations. That includes restricting access if the terms are violated. You can't block the road," Barbara said, standing up. "Hundreds of people use it every day now. Watch me." I walked out of the meeting and called the fence company. 3 days later, I had a massive gate installed right at the point where the road crossed from my main parcel to my western parcel. It was a serious gate, 12 feet wide, chain link with privacy slats and a heavy-duty lock. That first morning when I closed and locked the gate, the reaction was immediate. Cars backed up on both sides, people honked, yelled, and called the sheriff's office. Deputy Martinez showed up looking exhausted. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "Enforcing my property rights." "The HOA violated our agreement by making this a public road. Until they fix it, the gate stays closed. You're going to cause a massive traffic problem. That's the HOA's problem, not mine." Rick looked at the growing line of cars. "I need to call this in." Within an hour, the county sheriff himself showed up, along with a county administrator and, of course, Barbara Hutchins. Barbara was practically vibrating with rage. "This is illegal," she shrieked. "You can't block a public road. It's not a public road. It's a private easement across my property. I have the agreement right here." I handed copies to the sheriff and the county administrator. The administrator, a tired-looking man named Robert Mills, reviewed the document carefully. "Mr. Chen is technically correct. This is a private easement. If the terms have been violated, he has the right to restrict access." "This is outrageous." Barbara turned to the sheriff. "Arrest him." "For what?" the sheriff asked. "He's on his own property enforcing a legal agreement." Barbara sputtered, unable to form words. The sheriff turned to me. "Mr. Chen, I understand you have legal grounds here, but you're causing a public safety issue. Emergency vehicles need to be able to use this route. I'll give keys to emergency services, fire, police, ambulance, but regular traffic needs to go around until the HOA fixes this." The sheriff nodded. "That's fair." He turned to Barbara. "Ma'am, you need to resolve this with Mr. Chen or find an alternative route for your residents." Over the next few days, chaos reigned. The Meadowbrook residents, who had gotten used to their convenient shortcut, now had to take the long way around, adding 20 minutes to their commute. The local residents who had discovered the route were even more furious, since they now had to return to the congested main roads. My phone rang constantly with angry calls. Someone spray-painted "tyrant" on my barn. A local Facebook group dedicated to complaining about me sprouted hundreds of members overnight. Barbara Hutchins gave another news interview, this time calling me vindictive and dangerous, but I held firm. The gate stayed locked. After a week, Michelle Portman called. "Mr. Chen, let's talk reasonably. What will it take to open that gate? Honor the original agreement. HOA use only, no public designation. The county won't revoke that designation now. There's political pressure to keep the road public. Then I guess the gate stays closed. We'll sue you. Go ahead, I'll win, and it'll cost you more time and money." Another week passed. The complaints intensified. Someone filed a formal complaint with the county, which triggered an investigation. The county sent an inspector to review the situation, and after examining our agreement, he sided with me. Then things escalated in a way I didn't expect. One morning, I woke up to find the gate had been cut. Someone had taken bolt cutters to the lock and chain, and the gate was standing open with cars flowing through. I immediately installed a camera system covering the gate and got a heavier chain with a more secure lock. That night, the camera caught two men I didn't recognize attempting to cut the new lock. I called the sheriff's office, and they were arrested for destruction of property. During questioning, the men admitted that Barbara Hutchins had offered to pay them to keep the road open. That was a mistake on her part, a big one. The sheriff charged Barbara with criminal conspiracy to commit property destruction. She was arrested at her home, and the local news covered it extensively. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. The story was no longer about an unreasonable farmer blocking traffic. It was about an HOA president so entitled and desperate that she'd hired people to commit crimes. The Meadowbrook HOA held an emergency meeting and removed Barbara as president. Michelle Portman resigned as chief counsel, clearly wanting to distance herself from the situation. A new board was elected, led by a reasonable guy named Tom Sanders, who actually had farming in his background and understood rural property rights. Tom called me directly. "Mr. Chen, I want to apologize for how this was handled. I wasn't on the board when any of this started, but I've reviewed everything and you were treated terribly. Let's find a real solution." We met at my farm and Tom was genuinely apologetic. "Here's what I can offer. We'll petition the county to revoke the public road designation. It'll take some time, but we'll make it happen. In the meantime, we'll install our own gate system that allows HOA residents through with a code but restricts public access. You'll have a master override. Does that work? What about the traffic that's already using it? We'll make it clear it's private. We'll post signs, notify the county, and work with law enforcement to ticket trespassers. It should die down pretty quickly once people realize they can't use it freely." It was a fair offer, and Tom seemed sincere. "Okay, but I'm keeping my cameras up, and if anyone from the HOA violates our agreement again, we're done talking." "Understood. And Marcus, I hope we can actually be good neighbors going forward. I grew up on a farm, and I know how important that land is to you. The previous board forgot that." We shook hands, and this time it felt genuine. Over the next month, Tom kept his promises. The HOA installed their own gate system with electronic access for residents. They posted clear, private road signs. They worked with the county to revoke the public designation, which took some political maneuvering but eventually succeeded. More importantly, Tom made sure the HOA members understood the situation. He sent out a newsletter explaining what had happened, how the previous board had overstepped, and why I was completely within my rights to protect my property. He even included a personal note apologizing on behalf of the community. The harassment stopped. My phone went quiet. Someone even left a basket of baked goods on my porch with an apology note. As for Barbara Hutchins, she pled guilty to conspiracy charges and received probation, community service, and a fine. More significantly, she and her family moved away from Meadowbrook about 6 months later, presumably embarrassed by the whole situation. The legal proceedings against the original HOA board also moved forward. Bill Hartley filed a civil suit seeking additional damages for the harassment, the destruction of my gate, and the emotional distress. We settled out of court for an additional $75,000, which I used to upgrade equipment and build a new irrigation system. Life finally returned to something resembling normal. The road through my property was there, but it was properly fenced, properly maintained, and no longer felt like an invasion. The utility connections proved incredibly valuable, and my farm's productivity increased with reliable water and power. Tom Sanders and I actually became friendly. He'd stop by occasionally to chat, and we discovered we had similar views on land management and rural living. He helped buffer me from the occasional HOA drama, and I helped him understand agricultural issues that sometimes came up with the development adjacent to farmland. One afternoon, about a year after everything settled, I was working in my barn when a Tesla pulled up. A young couple got out, looking around with interest. "Can I help you?" I asked, wiping grease from my hands. "Hi, we're looking at houses in Meadowbrook," the woman said. "Someone told us there was an interesting story about the road that runs through here." I smiled. "You could say that." "We heard the HOA tried to bully the farmer and ended up getting blocked. Is that true?" "More or less. It was complicated." The man laughed. "We were actually impressed. We're looking for a community that respects property rights and doesn't have a crazy HOA board." Sounds like Meadowbrook learned that lesson the hard way. They did. The current board is actually pretty reasonable. Good to know. Mind if we look around a bit? This is beautiful land. I gave them a brief tour, explaining what I grew and how the farm operated. They seemed genuinely interested, and as they left, the woman said something that stuck with me. "It's nice to see someone stand up for themselves. Most people just roll over when a big organization pushes them around." After they left, I stood looking out across my fields. The road cut through them, a permanent reminder of the battle I'd fought. But the fields were productive again. The crops were growing. The farm was thriving. I thought about that morning when I first heard the machinery and ran out to find them tearing through my fence. I thought about the rage and helplessness I felt watching them destroy my crops. I thought about Barbara Hutchins and her smug certainty that she could do whatever she wanted. But I also thought about Bill Hartley's advice on leverage. About the moment I realized I held something they needed. About closing that gate and watching their faces as they realized they couldn't just bulldoze through my life without consequences. The story spread throughout the county and even made some regional news. I became known as the guy who blocked the HOA, which was both embarrassing and oddly satisfying. Other farmers dealing with development issues started calling me for advice, and I did my best to help them understand their rights. The county even revised some of their easement policies because of what happened, making it harder for organizations to claim historical rights-of-way without proper documentation. My lawyer said we'd created important case law that would protect other property owners down the line. But mostly, I was just glad to be farming again. The drama was over, the battle was won, and life had found a new equilibrium. The road through my farm carried Meadowbrook residents to their homes, but it did so on my terms under an agreement that respected my property and my rights. Sometimes, late at night, I still wondered what would have happened if I'd just accepted their first offer. If I'd taken the $20,000 and let them do whatever they wanted, would it have been easier? Probably. Would it have been right? Absolutely not. Standing up to the HOA had cost me time, stress, and a lot of sleepless nights. But it had also taught me something important about power and persistence. The Meadowbrook HOA represented hundreds of families and had deep pockets, but they didn't have right on their side. And in the end, that mattered. The law worked the way it was supposed to work. It protected my property rights. It held the HOA accountable for their overreach, and it forced them to negotiate in good faith rather than simply taking what they wanted. My farm was whole again, or as whole as it could be with a road running through it. But that road, with its proper fences and proper agreements and proper restrictions, represented something important. It represented the idea that nobody, not even a well-funded HOA with political connections and aggressive lawyers, could just roll over an individual without consequences. I still see Tom Sanders occasionally, and we laugh about the whole mess. He tells me the current HOA board uses my story as a cautionary tale, a reminder to always respect property rights and follow proper procedures. He says they're much more careful now about how they deal with their neighbors. As for me, I'm just a farmer in Iowa, working my land and living my life. But I'm also the guy who stood up to an HOA that thought they could do whatever they wanted, and I'm the guy who closed a gate and made them face reality. The road runs through my property, but it runs on my terms. And every time I drive past that gate, every time I see those fences marking the boundaries of the easement, I'm reminded that sometimes the little guy can win. Sometimes standing firm, knowing your rights, and refusing to be bullied actually works. The wheat grows tall in my fields now, right up to the fence line on both sides of that road. The soil has recovered from the initial damage. The irrigation system hums efficiently with its connection to municipal water. My barn has reliable electricity, and my internet connection lets me run a modern farming operation. Life is good. The farm is profitable. And somewhere out there, Barbara Hutchins is probably still fuming about the farmer who wouldn't let her have her way. That thought makes me smile every single time. The sun sets over my fields, casting long shadows across the land I fought so hard to protect. Tomorrow I'll wake up early and do it all again, tending this land, growing these crops, and living this life I chose. Nobody can take that from me. Not an HOA, not a board president with an entitlement complex, not anyone. This is my farm. This is my home. And I protected it the only way that mattered, by knowing my rights, standing my ground, and refusing to let anyone tell me I didn't matter. In the end, that's what made all the difference.